Picture this. It's 1880, and you're the sheriff of a dusty boomtown outside of Tombstone, Arizona. The leader of a local outlaw gang has called you out. He's challenged you to a duel at high noon. What would you do? Form a posse? Deputize your cousin? Or meet him face to face on Main Street with your hand on your holster? A sheriff in the Old West did face moments like this, but not as often as the movies make it seem. Let's take a closer look at the reality of being a sheriff in the Wild West in this episode of
Golden Gun.
Out here, you didn't apply to be sheriff. You survived long enough to get voted in. Sheriffs weren't hired by fancy government offices. They were elected by locals who mostly just wanted the loudest gun pointed in the right direction. The campaign was simple. Convince the town you could shoot straight and wouldn't steal too much. Some men wore the badge out of duty, some wore it out of pride, and a few because they'd already been kicked out of every other job in town. The pay, somewhere between barely surviving and who needs food anyway. Most sheriffs earned about $100 a month if the county remembered to pay them. So yeah, technically they were public servants, just with less job security and way more bullets. The sheriff's day-to-day wasn't all shootouts and standoffs. Most of it was boring, dirty, and thankless. Between breaking up bar fights, chasing drunks out of the street, and collecting taxes no one wanted to pay, a lot of sheriffs spent more time writing paperwork than drawing pistols. When the weather got bad, they doubled as animal control, mail carriers, and sometimes even coroners, multitasking before it was cool. The real danger wasn't always gunfire, it was exhaustion. If you were lucky, you got a few hours of peaceful rest, usually with one hand on your revolver and the other on the door. Because in the Wild West, being sheriff didn't just mean keeping order. It meant staying alive long enough to try again tomorrow. Hollywood loves a good standoff. Two men, one dusty street, and a tumbleweed with perfect comedic timing. Real life, not quite so cinematic. Gunfights were fast, messy, and usually over before anyone realized who started them. Most sheriffs avoided shooting if they could. A bullet might end a fight, but it could also end your career, your paycheck, or your popularity with the locals. The best lawmen knew that words were cheaper than ammo and way easier to reload. Still, sometimes talk ran out before daylight did. And when that happened, hesitation wasn't an option. Pulling your gun didn't make you brave, it made you responsible for every bullet, every witness, and every headline that came after. There was no glory in killing a man, only silence that came after the smoke cleared, and the knowledge that someone not too far away was planning on being faster than you next time. When tempers ran hot, the sheriff wasn't the only one handing out justice. The townsfolk thought the law was too slow. They brought their own version, usually armed, angry, and on fire. A mob could form faster than a thunderstorm. One rumor, one drunk accusation, and suddenly, half the town was marching down Main Street with torches and rope. A good sheriff had to know when to stand his ground and when to quietly step aside before he became the next target. Vigilante groups called themselves citizens' committees, which sounded respectable, until you realized their meeting notes were mostly just names and modes of execution. Some sheriffs tried to calm the crowd, others just made sure they weren't in front of it. And when the mob decided the badge was on the wrong side, well, let's just say plenty of lawmen learned the hard way that the line between keeping order and losing it was about as thin as the tin their badge was stamped from. For every honest sheriff trying to keep the peace, there was another one keeping the payoff. The line between lawman and outlaw wasn't moral, it was financial. When the county forgot your paycheck for the third month in a row, taking a donation from the local saloon didn't feel like corruption, it felt like dinner. Some sheriffs looked the other way for gamblers, smugglers, or worse, especially when the fine was paid in gold dust. A few got creative. They ran protection rackets, tipped off stagecoach robbers, or conveniently lost evidence that came with a heavy purse. Others were straight-up double agents, wearing the badge by day and the mask by night. In the frontier, justice wasn't blind. It just liked to keep one eye open for opportunity. If one sheriff wasn't enough to keep a town in line, don't worry. The government had a few more waiting in the wings. U.S. marshals worked for the feds, and they didn't always play nice with local law. A sheriff answered to voters, a marshal answered to Washington, and neither liked taking orders from the other. Sometimes they cooperated, chasing the same outlaw or splitting a reward. Other times they ended up pointing guns at each other over who got to make the arrest. Marshals had the paperwork, sheriffs had the hometown advantage, and in a place where most people didn't trust either one, law enforcement sometimes looked a lot like two dogs fighting over the same bone. If the outlaw didn't get shot, it was usually because the lawmen were too busy shooting at each other. The badge might have been tin, but it weighed like iron. Every time a sheriff pinned it on, he became the closest thing the frontier had to law, order, and accountability, which sounds noble until you realize it also made him everyone's favorite target. Drunks cursed him, gamblers bribed him, and outlaws tested him just to see if the stories were true. Most sheriffs didn't die in gunfights. They died broke, forgotten, or just plain tired. The ones who lasted long enough to retire usually did it quietly, running a general store or leaving town before someone remembered what they'd done. The movies made it look like courage. The truth? It was pretty exhausting wearing a badge. So what happened when a sheriff finally hung up his guns? Usually nothing good. There was no pension plan, no retirement ceremony, just a handshake, a tab at the saloon, and a strong chance someone still wanted revenge. Some went into business, running stables, saloons, or general stores where they could still keep an eye on the trouble they used to chase. Others drifted, bounty hunting, gambling, or dying broke in the same towns they once cleaned up. The lucky ones landed government jobs, which mostly meant less shooting and more paperwork. A fair trade unless you missed being shot at. A few tried their hand at politics, selling their reputation one vote at a time. And the really famous ones like Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson spent their later years watching Hollywood turn their gunfights into bedtime stories. In the end, most sheriffs faded the way they lived, quietly, stubbornly, and just a little disappointed in the people they'd risked everything to protect. While the movies tell us one story, the truth was something else entirely. The life of a Wild West sheriff wasn't clean or heroic. It was messy, thankless, and came with zero benefits, unless you count lead poisoning. Their days were long, their nerves were shot, and their paychecks were usually late. Not much different from the folks enforcing the law today. So what kind of sheriff would you have been out here on the frontier? The peacemaker, the gunslinger, or the guy smart enough to get out while he could? Let us know in the comments. Saddle up and subscribe for more stories from Golden Guns.
Golden guns, golden guns. Thank you for watching Golden Guns. Please like and subscribe.